You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host. I am Koku. Glad to be back again. Glad to have you guys. I see Revolutionary Matron is here in the chat room. The Pro-Black Perspective is here. Peace and greetings to all of you. Appreciate you guys for coming through. Let me just remind everyone now. This show is a part of a podcast network. The network is called KWAZ Radio. You guys should be tuning in to the other shows on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Yes, indeed. Also, check out the Revolutionary Matrons show as well. I saw a notification that she was on live earlier. I'll tune into that later on tonight. Matron, you should also get that bump to me soon so I can play it on the show. But yeah, check out KWAZ Radio. There's plans to expand some stuff and put some things together. So we got some stuff working behind the scene with the Revolutionary Matron. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, tonight, Thursday night, let's do this reading. Remember, we have a Discord. Join the Discord. The link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat right now if you're live. By the way, you guys, Pro-Black Perspective, Revolutionary Matron, did they change something on YouTube recently, like with the setup, and like it changed, like they offered you the option of like slow mode and all that kind of stuff? I did it today and it looked different than it looked even on Tuesday. So I'm just curious if you guys have seen a change in the setup of a live stream on YouTube. Anyway, that said, tonight we're reading The Influence of Malcolm X on Black Militancy. I don't know why, but today my mind was on Malcolm X. And I think a part of it has to do with we don't really see anybody speaking out here publicly, right? With a hefty set of balls. We really don't see that. Now, you might want to criticize Malcolm X and said he had some inconsistencies and what have you, especially considering he was Muslim. And and because of it, a lot of people was on some. I'm sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked reading something here. The Pro-Black Perspective said I saw a change in studio, but was late, so kind of skipped through. You should turn up slow mode. Oh, slow mode is a bad thing? I thought slow mode was a good thing. I don't know how to turn it off live, so I won't turn it off now. But I have it set where you could send a message every an individual can send a message every 15 seconds. But yeah, you know, I was thinking about that because I saw, you know, every day on Twitter you see some ADOS FBA BS, and I think what led me to think about Malcolm X was, you know, they wouldn't even consider, you know, like Garvey. Like I saw someone say Garvey was just some dead Jamaican, right? And in its place of that, we have, as Onita say, we'll call it do-nothings doing nothing, right? Do-nothings doing nothing, you know? So it got me thinking about Malcolm X and Black Militancy, and I found this paper in a folder that I have with unread papers. And I figured I'll just read it with you guys. Right? So the influence of Malcolm X on Black militancy. It's by FREDERICK D. HARPER of Howard University. It says, great men influence great men. Great men influence great men. And the question, now, and by men, we mean male and female, right? The question I have for you is, who are you influencing? At the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, you want to be a person when you leave this realm, earthly plane. You wanna be able to have positively influenced other African men. Great men influence. Great men. But hold 1 second. Right? And a lot of times, who you influence really tells a lot about who you are. All right. So to continue, great men influence great men and are in turn influenced by great men. Socrates influenced Plato. Hegel influenced Marx. Gandhi influenced Martin Luther King. Great leaders also influence the time in which they live and the people around whom they live. Along the same line, it appears that Malcolm X had a significant influence on Black militant leaders and on the philosophy of Black militants. Thus, the thesis of this paper is that the personality and philosophy of Malcolm X have strongly affected the philosophy of Eldridge Cleaver, Black militant leaders, and Black militant students. Julius Lester, in 1966, in an article titled "The Angry Children of Malcolm X," states, more than any other person, Malcolm X was responsible for the new militancy that entered the movement in 1965. Malcolm X said aloud those things which Negroes had been saying among themselves. He even said those things Negroes had been afraid to say to each other. His clear, uncomplicated words cut through the chains on Black minds like a giant blowtorch. In To Kill a Black Man, Lomax, 1968, suggests the influence of Malcolm X on Black Power, Black Panther Party, and various civil rights groups. The philosophy of Malcolm X and Eldridge Cleaver during their Black Muslim period was relatively the same, reflecting the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the philosophy of the Nation of Islam headed by Muhammad. Therefore, their post-Black Muslim philosophies and their independent ideas after breaking with the Nation of Islam were examined and compared in suggesting Malcolm X's influence on Cleaver. It should also be mentioned that the philosophy of Malcolm X was changing until his death, and the philosophy of Cleaver is apparently still in transition as he gains new experiences. Hence, philosophical similarities between the two reflect ideas held by both persons at any one time in their post-Black Muslim period. Both Malcolm X and Cleaver were able to negate old ideas for new ones, which indicated their willingness to grow and develop their ideology. So this brings us to a summary The Life of Malcolm X. Summary of the life of Malcolm X. Malcolm Little, who changed his surname to X after joining the Black Muslims, was born May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. Early childhood, Malcolm X's family moved to Lansing, Michigan, where he enrolled at the age of 5 in a predominantly white elementary school. His father, an active and militant leader and minister, met his death by the Ku Klux Klan members, according to Malcolm X, during Malcolm X's childhood. His mother became very disturbed shortly after, sent to a mental institution, which left the children without parents. His mother, by the way, the paper doesn't say it here, at least not so far. Malcolm X's mother was Caribbean, from Grenada, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, from Grenada. And so, again, that shows you that Garvey just didn't have Africans in America who were his supporters, because his parents were Garveyites, right? Garvey had a lot of Caribbean support here, and in fact, the whole civil rights movement was estimated to be heavily supported by, influenced by Caribbean folks. Actually, too, crazy story, and I should have this person on one day to talk about it, but like MLK Jr. used to be down in the Bahamas all the time, and a family member of mine was in constant contact with some of his people. I think one of his bodyguards or something. But I just wanted to interject that Malcolm X, until recently anyway, was held highly here in America. But because of his background, you know, folks will want to cancel him too, because his mother was Caribbean. You know, it's wild. Anyway, to continue. Therefore, Malcolm X and his sisters and brothers were divided among guardians, with one of Malcolm X's homes being a detention home. 7th grade, Malcolm X enrolled in a predominantly white junior high school in Mason, Michigan, where he made among the highest grades in his studies and was elected president of the 7th grade class. He dropped out of school after finishing the 8th grade. I mean, look how quickly that turnaround was, right? Here he was excelling, right, in this predominantly white school, which I'm curious to know how he was elected president of the 7th grade class. But of course, by the time he finished the 8th grade a year later, he was out of it. The reason he gave was a discouraging counseling session with a teacher who advised that he planned to be a carpenter instead of a lawyer, because carpentry was more appropriate for a nigga. After leaving school, Malcolm X went to live with his sister in Boston, where he learned how to make money as a hustler in the streets. After working occasionally and hustling between Boston and New York City, he was arrested at the age of 20, almost 21, charged with robbery, and sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he only served 6.5 years. Malcolm X read very much while in prison, and also became interested in the Black Muslims, an all-black separatist religious sect headed by Elijah Muhammad. Upon release from prison, Malcolm X joined the Black Muslims, spending approximately 12 years with the sect, becoming its chief spokesman and organizer before his suspension by Elijah Muhammad. That was in 1963 for disobeying orders not to publicly comment on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, here's a question I'd like to ask for the few people who might be listening live, or even if you're listening in the playback. What do you think was the real reason why Elijah Muhammad and them didn't want Malcolm X to comment on the assassination of John F. Kennedy? based on all you've read and what you understand of that group, why do you think he gave the order for Malcolm X not to speak publicly about the killing of JFK? Mchaka's here saying peace, Mchaka. I'll read your comments to that question in a second. Malcolm X declared his independence from the Nation of Islam, set out to seek a new philosophy. In 1964, he organized the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was oriented toward freedom and liberation for Black people and other oppressed groups. Was it about other oppressed groups? He also made 2 trips to Africa and gave a number of speeches in the United States reflecting a philosophy based on the unity of Black people, political and economic control of Black communities by Black people, the organization of both a national and an international struggle of Black people and oppressed people, and human rights for all people. Malcolm X continued to speak nationally in early 1965, made a trip to England and France in order to help Black Europeans organize in their countries. He was refused entry to France. Upon his return to the United States, various attempts were made on his life. February 21st, 1965, he was assassinated while speaking in New York City at the age of 39. A number of events in Malcolm X's life appear to have influenced his philosophy and development. So we're going to get into a short list here of Malcolm's life. And in the chat room, I see the Pro-Black Perspective says the grapevine is that the person who killed JFK was the same billionaire who was funding the NOI. Wow. Revolutionary Matron says money and influence. Every org seeks their validity from the government. Every org seeks their validity from the government. Before I continue with that reading in the paper, the question I guess, I don't know if I should make this an outside or an inside question, but it's almost as if you can't trust a so-called Black organization. It's almost as if you can't trust Black organizations unless you create it yourself. And that is wild to me. And even if you create it yourself, right, you're going to have to do heavy vetting, right, to make sure you don't have one of these agent types in your organization. And I'll be honest with you, that's a bit discouraging. It's a bit discouraging. And we could talk about how discouraging that is, maybe during the Shoot the Breeze or something on Saturday. But if the word on the street or if the grapevine is speaking some truth here, what should Malcolm X have done? Should he have vetted the organization better? Not take it for its face value, which is what I personally always have said was Malcolm's biggest problem. He took that stuff too much at heart. He took it for what it seemed like on the face of it. But was Malcolm, like, if you could go back and be Malcolm, what would you do different? That's the question I'm putting out right now. If you could go back and be Malcolm, what would you do different? Right? Revolutionary Matron says the protected from The protected from taxes class of an organization is established and enforced by the government. You cannot trust them, nor anyone that is seeking or attempts to seek money consciousness. Afrojam is here. Afrojam is saying the Nation of Islam openly stated they were not political. That was a policy. Well, if that's the case, why was there Malcolm to begin with? And if they weren't political, and I'm sorry, if they weren't political, how could they be a nation? Politics is a part of nationhood. Right? Afrojam says Malcolm X was like that because their ideology helped him and he was in prison. Yeah, I get that part. I get why he was like that. But clearly he needed to vet. And that's something I tell black folks all the time around me. You've got to vet everything you become a part of. You have to vet everyone around you who's supposed to be in solidarity with you. It's just what it is. Right? And if I'm joining an organization, which I've had several opportunities to do, I'm always invited out to some organization. I look into some of the folks in the organization. Or I'll go to a meeting, and if I see some funny style stuff, I'm done with that. Revolutionary Matron says religious organizations have to say that to keep their class. It is illegal to be religious and political. I get that. I get that. But that says a lot about the NOI and their true functioning to me. Right? Afrojam says they are crazy. They state they originate in Saudi. Yeah, that, you see, let's not talk about the principles. Right? Like I posted on Twitter a month or two ago. If you're a black man talking about you're Asiatic, I'm straight. I'm cool on you. I'm cool on you. Right? He goes on to say they had a possible white male as a god. They also believe kinky hair is a curse from God. Yeah, these guys believe that your hair should look like your eyebrows. I saw this youth, Riza Islam, the other day. All I could do was shake my head. Looked like he made his head kind of red. I don't know if he's trying to be the next Malcolm. But I just looked at it like that. The Revolutionary Matron says Malcolm had no other choice other than starting his own org. They killed him for it because he was going to divide their power. I can get behind that. Right? But black folks, I'm telling you, you have got to start vetting whatever it is you're getting into, man. You got to start vetting that thoroughly. Let me continue with the reading. So a number of events in Malcolm X's life appear to have influenced his philosophy and development. Number one was the death of his father, and the institutionalization of his mother deprived him of significant parental images. Also, Malcolm X's feeling that the Ku Klux Klan killed his father and that the social welfare agency had his mother placed in a mental institution for most of her adult life served to decrease his trust in white people, to alienate him from the American system. 2, his unfavorable counseling session along with other racist overtones out in junior high school influenced him to drop out of school. 3, Malcolm X's arrest for robbery saved him from the vices and dangers of the ghetto that he was exposed to as a hustler. His subsequent imprisonment provided opportunity for preparation and self-education. 4, his conversion to the Nation of Islam provided pride, an identity, and an opportunity to develop his speaking and debating skills, among other talents. 5, his break with the black Muslims freed him to develop his own philosophy, which is what the matron was just getting to. 6, his trip to the spiritual city of Mecca changed his perspective towards white people. You know, I always question that, by the way. I always question that. Was Malcolm really changed towards white folks? Or was he changed towards white folks who were also Muslim? 7, Malcolm X's trips to Africa changed his ideology toward the black struggle for human rights. So this brings us to the section called the personality of Malcolm X. But I see the chat room is doing some stuff, so let me read what's going on in the chat room. By the way, if you're here with me today live especially, hit the like button for me. If you're new here, subscribe, click the bell to be notified when I'm on live. I'm usually on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right. But if you're here with me, click the like button. I would appreciate that. In the chat room, Revolutionary Matron said religious orgs have to say that to keep their class. It's illegal to be religious and political. Afro Jam said they are crazy. They state they originate in Saudi Arabia. They had a possible white male as a god. They also believe kinky hair is a curse from God. Revolutionary Matron says Malcolm had no other choice other than starting his own org. They killed him off for it because he was going to divide their power. Okay, so that's stuff I read before. New stuff. Chaka97 says, I think his time in the nation was integral to his growth. Nonetheless, I would have still left the nation, but not have publicly condemned Elijah, focused solely on the OAAU. Okay, I can respect what Chaka is from. Now, Chaka, you wouldn't have publicly criticized Elijah because of the elements of the NOI. See, what a lot of people don't talk about with the NOI, which is why I've always been skeptical of the group. You know, not to be disparaging, but just to be real about it. Like, the NOI recruited former hustlers and pimps and killers and whatnot who were in prison. At one time, it was kind of known as the prison religion, right? A prison faith or something like that, right? And when you watch that documentary, I always bring this documentary up. Hold on one second. I always bring this documentary up because you know, it just shows you how crazy that group is and how much zealots there were in that group, right? But the element inside the NOI was an element that didn't mind taking out people, and that's just what it is. That's just what it is, right? The Revolutionary Matron says all religions seek to amass power. No religion ever did the African any good. Absolutely. I'm 100% behind that comment. Afrojam says they also have never used violence on any European, only on former members of other black. You see, that's my thing. That's my thing. You got folks who have no problem carrying out violent acts against other black folks, but folks were being lynched in the South and whatnot, and y'all didn't do nothing about it. Revolutionary Matron said Malcolm liked white women before. I don't know if that ever changed. Okay. Afro Jam says, Fruit of Islam, anyone? Yeah, I mean, but that's clown shit. Look, right now, Farrakhan is in Chicago, headquartered in Chicago, right? What happens in Chicago every weekend? And what kills me is, like, I see a lot of Black Americans, Africans in America, right? When Farrakhan does his speech, whatever they call that shit, right? Whatever they call that speech Farrakhan does a couple times a year or whatever, right? Like, you have folks who talk about the honorable minister and all this old shit, but what's going on in Chicago? And then don't even get me started with, you guys have seen, speaking about billionaires who fund NOI, you guys have seen the pictures with Farrakhan hugged up, all booed up with this ooish person, right? So the pro-Black perspective says, I would have criticized publicly. I'm courageous. Chaka 97 says to the pro-Black perspective, or maybe you're just into martyrdom. Afro Jam says, I don't know if you know about Michael X, a mixed guy from the UK, who was the face of the UK branch of the NOI. No, tell us about Michael X, if you don't mind. And Chaka 97 says it put his family's life, ultimately his life, in danger. Afro Jam says they were and still are full of crazies, right? But tell us about Michael X in the chat, and when I come back to the chat, I'll read your comment. All right, let me continue with the paper. By the way, if you didn't know this, Malcolm X is one of my favorite civil rights era leaders. And he's one of my I want to say he's almost one of my favorite people, even though I've never met the man, of course. But he's also, to me, a sad case. I don't know if anyone of you also feels similarly. But to me, he's really a sad case, too. Because he was too into this thing. He was a zealot for something that wasn't a zealot for him. That's what you want to avoid in life. You don't want to be a zealot for something that's not a zealot for you. Right? And, you know, I don't have numbers on this, but Malcolm probably was a huge reason for a lot of the membership into the NOI in this time period, you know, in his lifetime. He was a zealot for something that clearly wasn't a zealot for him. Right? The personality of Malcolm X. What were qualities or traits of Malcolm X's personality that were significant in his influence on others? In reply to this question, the literature suggests that Malcolm X possessed strong qualities of leadership, intelligence, charisma, and creativity. His leadership was evident in his election to the presidency of his 7th grade class. Okay, that proves it. In his role as leading hustler in Harlem and Roxbury, as an image and advice giver while in prison, as a minister and Black Muslim ambassador, and as a national and international leader. Malcolm X's behavioral responses in various situations indicated that he was above average in intelligence. He was quick and accurate in thought, as displayed in speeches, debates, interviews, and question and answer periods. In his autobiography, he reported that his academic grades were among the highest in his junior high school. Shabazz suggests an above average intelligence in Malcolm X by indicating that he read rapidly and broadly, grasping easily and quickly. Malcolm X used knowledge from his readings and personal experiences combined with his intelligence to rhetorically combat racism and oppression. According to Epps, 1968, he, quote, was an extraordinary, clear thinker with a penchant for synthesizing political and philosophical ideas, end of quote. On one occasion, he debated a panel of PhDs of different specialities, defending himself well and indicating a combination of intelligence, rhetorical skill, and acuity of articulation. You won't see that from Tariq Nasheed now. You remember when Tariq Nasheed had that quote-unquote debate with Jared Taylor? Good Lord. Regarding charisma in the personality of Malcolm X, Warren, in 1965, notes that, quote, he has the air of a man who can be himself with many eyes on him. And, quote, Warren goes further to describe, I discovered that the pale, dull, yellowish face that had seemed so veiled, so stony, as though beyond all feeling had flashed into its merciless, leering life, the sudden wolfish grin, pale pink lips drawn hard back to show the strong teeth, the unveiled glitter of the eyes beyond the lenses, giving the sense that the lenses were any part of a clever disguise, that the eyes need no help, that they suddenly see everything. Killian, 1968, writes that Malcolm X was the only black leader with the charisma and organizational skill necessary to lead a successful revolution. But here's an excerpt. Individual leader or leadership group who might lead the Negro Revolution into a phase of mass insurrection is not yet discernible. Such a person would have to combine charisma with organizational ability. Had he lived, Malcolm X might have been the type of leader who, with his lieutenants, would have been the nucleus for the building of a revolutionary army. How do you guys feel about that statement? Something tells me some will disagree with that statement, right? Tell me how you guys feel about that statement. I see there's comments in the chat, but let me go a little further, let you guys answer that question as well. How you feel about that excerpt right there? And then I'll come and read off the comments. Malcolm X indicated creativity in organizing unique and different phrases that depicted his point so well. He had the ability to create laughter in other people. In a number of his speeches, he had to ask the audience to try to hold their applause and laugh at the same time. Malcolm X also had a talent of getting his point over by using literary techniques, with a specialty in employing animal figures. Okay, that's true. Plain logic, humor, and literary techniques were the cornerstone of his creative rhetoric. Epps very well sums up all that is suggested here in his one statement, quote, Malcolm X created, primarily with rhetoric, the radical view of the Negro experience in America. At this point, it might be practical to illustrate examples of Malcolm X's rhetoric for a better understanding of the creative rhetoric herein implied. Following statements are largely taken from speeches, debates, question and answer periods, and interviews. So let's begin. How can you thank a man for giving you what's already yours? I'm not going to sit at your table and watch you eat with nothing on my plate and call myself a diner. Sitting at the table doesn't make you a diner. Being in America doesn't make you an American. When you register your political potential, that means your gun is loaded. Just because it's loaded, you don't have to shoot until you see a target that will be beneficial to you. If you want a duck, don't shoot when you see a bear. Wait till you see a duck. Wait till you see what you want. There's no such thing as the South. It's America. One room in your house is dirty, you've got a dirty house. No one knows the master better than the servant. You know why the white man really hates you? It's because every time he sees your face, he sees a mirror of his crime, and his guilty conscience can't bear to face it. I don't know if these guys have a conscience. I'm not too sure about that, right? For the white man to ask the black man if he hates him is just like the rapist asking the raped, or the wolf asking the sheep, do you hate me? White man is in no moral position to accuse anyone else of hate. 400 years, the white man has had his foot-long knife, the black man's back. Now the white man starts to wiggle the knife out, maybe 6 inches. Black man's supposed to be grateful. Why? If the white man jerked the knife out, it's still going to leave a scar. Another one. Here lies a yellow man, killed by a black man, fighting for the white man, who killed all the red men. Right? Here lies a yellow man, killed by a black man, fighting for the white man, killed all the red men. I often have, and if you've been a long time listener, you know I don't respect black folks killing black folks. I really don't respect black folks killing for the white man either, which is essentially what black on black crime is. Let me, before I get to this section, similarities and backgrounds between Malcolm X and Cleaver. Let me deal with the chat room for a second. Right. In the chat room, where do I begin? Let me scroll up, I guess. Afrojam says they were and still are full of crazy. Absolutely. Mchaka said Savior's Day. It's the annual event you're talking about. Thank you, Mchaka 97 coming through with the info. Savior's Day. Like I hear comedians like Corey Holcomb and all these guys have all this respect when Savior's Day come around for this dude, and then in the same breath, almost, start doing some idiotic black on black nonsense. What does that say about what Farrakhan really represents? All right, Revolutionary Matron says money consciousness. There comes a time when you have enough money. Men are buying their families out of slavery. Men were buying their families out of slavery in 1822. Afrojam says he was a mixed guy of Trinidadian and Portuguese parentage. He was in America for a minute. Okay, so this is the Michael X guy. He was here in the 60s and 70s. He was like white females. He was close with Hakeem Jamal, Malcolm X's cousin. All right? A white female they were messing with was ordered to be killed by Michael X in Trinidad. Huh. He was caught on execution later. He was caught and executed later in 1975. Interesting. I wasn't aware of Michael X. Right? And by the way, a lot of black men in the 60s and 70s had these really weird relationships with white women, where, you know, it was bad enough it was sexual and whatnot, but it also, like, there was claims of torture and all kind of shit, death. Like, it was just strange. You know, this paper is gonna talk about Cleaver next, and Cleaver was one of these dudes who, you know, was kind of questionable too, man, to be real about it. Right? Rape and assault with the intent to murder and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of these black dudes had some, just, anyway. Where was I? Revolution Matrix says he's one of mine too, meaning favorite people. He gave us our manhood and sense of community. He was looking to belong, build, and break free. Right? Chaka 97 says Malcolm left his whole life entirely, including the white women, after prison. He was fully dedicated to the mandates of the NOI and then later on the global black struggle. Right? Chaka also agrees with the excerpt. Right? Afro Jam says that the brother he was talking about was once bailed out by John Lennon. Interesting. The pro-black perspective just voiced something that absolutely I was thinking about when I was reading this. It's wild. I was thinking about, like, are they going to mention Carlos Cooks? And in fact, I was thinking also, like, you know, you should mention Garvey too. Because if you study Message to the People, right? If you study Message to the People, which is the course on African philosophy, if you study that, you too can be akin to a Malcolm X, right? And if you study Garvey, if you're around the right people anyway, you study Garvey, you know that the next, you know, the handpicked replacement, so to speak, for Garvey was Cooks. And that Malcolm X had interactions with Cooks. You know, like, why is Carlos Cooks not mentioned? And as I asked that question, I remember something the pro-black perspective said, I think in the last live stream I did. And it's a very important point. Yes, Chaka is correct. Malcolm's father was a Garveyite as well. His parents were both. I think his parents met in a Garvey, in a UNIA meeting, right? What was I saying though? Yeah, but it reminded me of something the pro-black perspective said the other day, that nobody references anyone else inside this conscious community type stuff. And I spent a few hours after that episode thinking about that too. It's like we have a lot of folks who come on the scene and they just pass off thoughts and philosophies of others in the past, because no one's really referencing these folks. Who's referencing Carlos Cooks? Like Afro Jam says, very few people know who Carlos A. Cooks is. Afro Jam says, I was talking about Michael X like in White Females. It was even in his memoir. Okay. And Chaka says, the conscious question is a whole other broadcast, to be honest. Oh, it's not conscious question. It's a whole other... it's a whole other question for another broadcast. Okay. Afro Jam says Cleaver was sick. And Chaka follows with facts. And Chaka, sorry, Revolutionary Matron says they were opening UNA offices when his father was killed. You know, it's important to show lineage, I think. It's important to show these, you know, ideological lineage. And that's something, after the pro-black perspective made that point, but that's something I've been thinking about, especially that night when he made it. Like, we gotta start working, we have to be better at showing these lineages and stop accepting guys coming out. I forget who the guy's name is. A couple years ago, there was a guy in the conscious community. I think he might have been clicked in with Sarnetta and those guys. He liked to put out he liked to put out these lectures on PowerPoint. In fact, if I remember, Umar Johnson kind of dug into him about the PowerPoint stuff. Right. But these guys are putting up information that's not even original information or original research. But they won't tell you, this came from Garvey, this was from Cooks, this is Malcolm, this is, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that's wild. Revolutionary Matron says the conscious, and she capitalizes the con in conscious. The conscious are often con equals artists, con artists. All right? It is crazy. Now, Afro Jam says, Bobby E. Wright, a guy who influenced many of the 60s and 70s peers. Absolutely. Asa G. Hilliard and all those guys look to Bobby E. Wright. Right? KW Don 7 is here, always coming through. When I can't remember some guys like KW Don 7, M. Chaka, those guys will fill in that blank. Sarah Sutton Seti. That's the guy. Right? Young Pharaoh and these guys, always with a PowerPoint, no sources. Those aren't original thoughts. By the way, didn't I hear he beat up his woman and married a white woman or some shit the other day? It's a sad, it's a sad state of affairs, man. But to continue with the paper, similarities in backgrounds between Malcolm X and Cleaver. After presenting aspects of Malcolm X's life and personality, this section presents ways in which the lives of both Malcolm X and Cleaver were similar. Now, I'm curious to know why the author really put these two together, right? I mean, Cleaver apparently was in the NOI at one time, but do you really associate Cleaver with the NOI like you do Malcolm with the NOI? So why is this author putting these two together? But let's continue. It's also, in doing so, suggests ways in which Cleaver and Malcolm X's lives could have been affected by racism and racial discrimination in American society. This section also indicates ways in which Cleaver was not influenced by Malcolm X. Both Cleaver and Malcolm X migrated from small cities to large city ghetto areas. Cleaver, during childhood, migrated from Little Rock, Arkansas to Los Angeles. Malcolm X migrated from a small city in Michigan to Boston and later to New York. While in the ghetto of the big city, both experienced a life of hustling to survive, smoking marijuana, and having affairs with white women. There goes Revolutionary Matron's thing. Cleaver related, quote, rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying and trampling upon the white man's woman. Listen, you know what, I'll just leave that. I'll let you guys comment on that statement in the chat. All right. There's so much I want to say about that statement, but I'll leave it to you guys in the chat to comment on that. Rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying, trampling upon the white man's woman. Comparatively, Malcolm X expressed pleasure in exploiting a white woman who practically took care of him. Both were in their late teens upon the commencement of their interracial relationships. Cleaver and Malcolm X served a number of consecutive years in prison. By the way, if you could talk about Malcolm X and them messing around with white women, you could talk about Garvey and Carlos A. Cooks, etc. If you had space for that shit, you had space for that other stuff too, right? Cleaver and Malcolm X served a number of consecutive years in prison. Both immensely improved their education while in prison through a tremendous amount of reading. Both were converted to the Nation of Islam during this period, and both were admired and respected by their fellow prison mates. What's the respect of fellow prison mates? Right? What is that real? But I continue. Both later broke with the Nation of Islam and developed their own ideology. After leaving the Muslims, Cleaver joined the Black Panther Party, a militant organization centered around black liberation. After Malcolm X's break with the black Muslims, he allied himself with the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which he initiated, also a militant organization centered around black liberation. Malcolm X and Cleaver dropped out before completing high school. However, their wives had college backgrounds. Malcolm X's autobiography, he stated of his wife, quote, "I knew she was a native of Detroit, that she had been a student at Tuskegee Institute down in Alabama, an education major," end of quote. Cleaver's wife attended Oberlin College in Ohio before leaving to work with the Peace Corps in Washington, D.C., and later to work with civil rights. Cleaver and Malcolm X spoke to many college students throughout the country, including such prestigious universities as Stanford, University of California at Berkeley, Harvard, and Yale. Both warned students of their responsibility to combat racism. Malcolm X visited a number of socialist countries in Africa. By the way, it's a little bit questionable, but again, it might be due to whatever understanding they have. But it's a little bit questionable that these guys, Malcolm X in particular, was at Harvard speaking, right? Malcolm X visited a number of socialist countries in Africa. Similarly, Cleaver visited socialist Cuba, and at the time of this writing was in Africa, Algeria. So this paper is, you can tell how old it is, because I remember Cleaver died like in 99 or something. Malcolm X was associated with organizing the black Muslim newspaper Muhammad Speaks, in which he wrote several articles. Comparatively, Cleaver was associated with Ramparts magazine and wrote a number of articles for it. This allows me the opportunity to ask a very important question, one I actually meant to ask several Shoot the Breeze episodes ago. What are the black publications, be it online or in print, what are the black publications, and I know there's probably few in print, what are the black publications worthy of being read on a regular basis? What are the black publications worthy of being read today? Online, in print, you guys tell me. Right? To continue. It is suggested that the above similar experience of Malcolm X and Cleaver with the environmental and interactional factors had much to do with the similar philosophies and lifestyles of both personalities. Now that's a heavy thing to do, to tie these two to being similar people, right? That's a heavy-handed thing to do here. But let me check in with the chat and see what the chat has to say. By the way, I noticed that the viewers keep bouncing up and like swinging up and down. Is that due to bad internet or something? All right. If you're here live, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the like button. And if you listen to the playback, of course, hit the like button as well. Revolution Major says we have to build and show the children the ideological thought. We need to give them a better path because scholars, by virtue of the public fool system, muddy the waters. Right. M. Chaka 97 says Cleaver was a whole weirdo, bro. All right. I can't disagree. Afro, because to me, like that position he took with white women, how about put that energy into white men? I mean, not the act. Oh, you know, shit, that's what he want to do. Go do that too. But I'm saying, put that energy into the white man, right? Afro Jam says, I'm going to be honest. Whites popularized both Malcolm X and MLK. They narrowed down the civil rights era to those two. Who else do you think, Afro Jam, who else do you think was worthy or even worthier of being spotlighted, if that's the word, during that time. Like, who else during that time when they were alive, right? Because let me check something real quick. In that time when they were alive, right? Who would have been the alternative, right? I was trying to find it. What year did Carlos Cooks die? What year did Cooks die? Right, but who would have been the better alternative? Revolution Matron says the BPP had an element of order with defense, not just militancy. Yeah, the BPP was on bullshit too, though. And I used to like the BPP, and you know, this is the thing about imagery. Why I talk about imagery so much. Like, the image of the Panther Party was real dope, right? But what they stood on wasn't as dope as the image. What they stood on wasn't as dope as the image, right? KW Don 7 answered that question. He said Robert F. Williams. Now, was Robert F. Williams a spokesperson per se? I mean, I know he was about them guns, but from what I remember, didn't Forrest Whitaker play him in a movie, for example? And I kind of remember the whole idea of him was that he was reluctant in his role, right? Afro Jam says it removes the legacy of other leaders and the ordinary people who supported the movement and the militias. Revolutionary Matron says to Afro Jam, I agree that the whites polarized the movement, and I think they allowed each of them a forum because they were studying the ideology to destroy it from the inside out. Afro Jam says in the early civil rights era in the 50s, who were not oriented towards who were not oriented around integration. That's an interesting take too. So I'm not familiar. In the 50s, before MLK came on the scene, right after Emmett Till is murdered, and that launches the civil rights movement, was the movement militant? Was the movement separatist? And did that change when MLK came around? Is that what was going on? Right? Revolutionary Matron says, I don't know any publications that are worthy of being read. They all have a twisted ideology, pandering for dollars. Ain't that a shame? Pro-Black Perspective tweeted this the other day. He said something along the lines of the best chance we had here in America is with God, and we fumbled that. We didn't follow. We got them messed up, reported, and no one has ever been able to really recapture what Garvey, who, by the way, the NOI and all that, they would claim that they are, they are following or in some of Garvey's philosophy, right? But it's a shame we don't even have a paper, not even something online that is worthy. It's crazy. Revolutionary Matron says, I agree about the BPP. Every org, unfortunately, have their BS, and the community is so confused. Afro Jam says the civil rights movement is split. There is a majority of it pre-50s. Revolutionary Matron says, a man that does that is trash. A man that does not bring his issues to another man, it's not a man. Yeah, that's my thing. Look, I don't care for white women either. But I know that their whole power structure and all that is really based on their men. When these Karens do all this bullshit on screen, they're pandering to their men. They're not the ones who are going to show up and gun you down. It's their men who are going to do it. By the way, and I know I'm reading a Malcolm X paper, but I have to speak on stuff I see. It came up again today on Twitter. This sister, and as it turns out, the sister is Caribbean too, actually. What's the sister's name? Hold on, let me find the thread real quick, and I'll tell you. There's this sister who died a little while back. A black sister went to I guess you'll call it a sleepover with, her name was Tamla Horsford, and she was from St. Vincent. She was 40-year-old mom. And she went to this sleepover with a bunch of white women. And there's a picture from earlier in the night. And she ends up dead, brutalized, dead. And they quickly sweep it under the rug and say she fell off the second floor balcony, fell to her death. Meanwhile, she has all kind of heart lacerations, her wrists and stuff was broken. She had all these defensive wounds. They quickly brushed that under the rug. And the point I was trying to get across to someone is that you're insane to want to be up around these people. You're insane. And I blame a lot of that on the civil rights movement. You're insane. And truth be told, a guy I knew from college during the pandemic, like early in the pandemic, he died in a similar way. Black guy, Haitian guy, out in some boat somewhere, here with some white guys, and all of a sudden he disappeared under the water upon these white guys, and only to be seen again dead, drowned. Like, we gotta start getting our minds right. And I bring this up because in that story with that Tamla lady, there's a bunch of white women, and they had some white men kind of hanging around. I think the boyfriend of and husband of two of the ladies, and a third white dude was around too, right? I'm not worried about those white women immediately. It's really the dudes who I think of. So, I mean, harming them is one thing, but the real person you need to harm is you need to go step to the dude. I'm not saying if the war is happening and one of them get in your way, I'm not saying not to take action, because they could harm you just as easily too. But you gotta take it to this dude and his systems, right? Afro Jam says they're the one that started with Brown versus the board. So before that, he said the civil rights movement is split. There was a majority of it pre-50s. Then the one that started with Brown versus the board. The Brown versus the board was originally about equal funding. It got changed to integration, mainly by Thurgood Marshall. Stokely, Afro Jam goes on to say Stokely Carmichael should have been the face. He galvanized the young people in the cities. Isn't that the truth? I believe Stokely Carmichael is one of the most underrated leaders that we've ever had. I think a big part of what undermines his popularity is that he was strictly adherent to socialism. And I think, a lot of us have more information now. I believe more information than some of them did. We know that, that's just the other side of the same coin, right? But Stokely Carmichael, he was that dude too. Afro Jam says he was cited as the major influence on Black Power and Black Pride movement, which outlasted the Civil Rights movement. That's true. Revolution Matron says many children left to raise themselves accept the programming propaganda put forth by the media. She goes on to say we have no friends. Right? Okay. So let me continue in the paper. So we had the philosophical similarities between Cleaver and Malcolm X. The following philosophical similarities serve as an introductory section to the influences of Malcolm X on Cleaver. Similarities in this section reflect Cleaver and Malcolm X's thinking on such subjects as 1. Self-defense, 2. Black unity, 3. Coalition, blacks with whites, 4. Economic systems, capitalism as opposed to socialism, 5. Black economic and political control of black communities, and 6. Pluralism and black separation. Malcolm X made his position on self-defense clear in his quote-unquote Declaration of Independence, a statement of freedom from the Nation of Islam. He stated, quote, "We should be peaceful, law-abiding, but the time has come for the American Negro to fight back in self-defense whenever and wherever he is being unjustly and unlawfully attacked." So, of course, comparatively, Cleaver suggested self-defense in an interview with Playboy in 1968. He stated, "As I said before, we are engaged in organizing black communities so that they will have the power to stop the police from wanton harassment, killing of black people. And that also means self-defense if necessary. Beyond that, it means getting enough power so that we can have autonomous black departments of safety in black communities. We have the courage and the good sense to defend ourselves, but we are not about to engage in the kind of random violence that will give the pigs an opportunity to destroy us." I get that. I don't like the measure, right? The measure of just getting enough power. Just getting a little bit of power. Just getting a little bit of something to be able to do something. That doesn't sit well with me. But I'll say this. When you're, as Onita say put it, when you're a population within a nation, you need to be law-abiding. But when you're pressed with violence, you need to defend yourself. I was talking about this on Twitter with the pro-black perspective earlier. There's a video that's gone out recently of a black guy who is on social media now. There's a black guy, his kid, and a realtor, a black realtor. I forget where they are. All right, but they're in America, one of these townships that is seemingly predominantly white. And the realtor is, of course, showing the prospective home buyer, this black man and his kid, this home. And some white person in the neighborhood, it's to be assumed, called the police on these 3 men looking around, inspecting this home, right? And what was striking to me, if you go on the pro-black perspective page, at Onita said, you can see it. But that video is a little bit different than the one I saw. The one I saw previously, the black guy is hemmed up. They got the other 2 black males coming out of the house with their hands up. And no one is questioning anything. They just immediately threw their hands up and They're not saying anything. Listen, that was the only time I said. Let me read his tweet about the situation. And before I read it, when they come to realize, the cops came to realize this is a realtor, he's showing the house to prospective buyers. The white boy cop says to him, we apologize, thanks for going along with all this. Like, what do you mean, thanks for going along with all this? My personal first thought was, if you just throw your hands up in the air like that, as a realtor, doing your job, what else are you going to give into? If you don't have the power in your mind to at least say, listen, I get y'all are cops and whatnot, but I'm shouting from the house, because they're a good distance from the house. I'm shouting from the house, yo, I'm a realtor. These guys said nothing. The pro-black perspective said, black people getting pacified in America. You mean to tell me that at no point you say, I'm the realtor, and that's an empty house? He goes on to say, I've had my share of run-ins with the police. That immediate surrender and silence is inching you closer and closer to slavery. You gotta stop being so weak, black folks. You gotta stop being so weak. Listen, we die. All of us here right now, 100 years from now, we won't be here. We won't be here, and we might not even be that well remembered. Stand up for yourself today while you're here. You ain't gotta get all rah-rah. Like I see somebody, and that's the crazy thing. Like I see some of these youths out here getting all rah-rah when you're in captivity of these folks' enforcement agency. You ain't gotta go through all that. You ain't gotta go through all that. Hey, I'm a realtor. This house is being shown for sale. If you roll over and if you bend over that quickly, that easy, well done. All right, well done. In the chat, Matron says we have no friends. Afro Jam says he was leading a student movement originally. Socialism, communism, anarcho versions are commonplace there. Absolutely, that's a good point. That is a good point. Afro Jam goes on to say the student movements in universities are also an incredibly powerful role. It shows where the educated people's minds are going to be focused in the future. Good points there, Afro Jam. Good points. Yeah, good points. To continue, Cleaver and Malcolm X criticize the federal government and the American system of capitalism vehemently. Both alluded favorably to socialism as an alternative economic system. Malcolm X stated capitalism, quote, is like a chicken that can't lay a duck egg because the system of the chicken isn't constructed in a way to produce a duck egg. The political and economic system of this country is absolutely incapable of producing freedom and justice. By the way, what Malcolm does here is a very African thing. Right, we use animals to make your point, and I didn't want to gloss over that fact too. Right, I just wanted to point that out. When we read those African stories, clearly Malcolm had some inspiration there too, and he used it well. And I think that's what we should all be aiming to do in our own literature, in our own film, whatever it is we're doing. Those analogies, those African type of analogies, we should engage more. Furthermore, Malcolm X revealed it's impossible for a white person to believe in capitalism and not believe in racism. You can't have capitalism without racism. And if you find one and you happen to get that person into a conversation and they have a philosophy that make you sure they don't have this racism in their outlook, usually they're socialists or their political philosophy is socialism. That's a questionable thing, but okay. In comparison, Cleaver's views on economic systems were revealed in the interview. And the reason why I say that's an interesting thing is because a lot of times socialists just use black folks because they know black folks are the targets of capitalism, right? And they're always, you know, the forever underclass within capitalism, the whipping boy, if you will. Socialists come to black folks to get numbers, but the interest in black folks is not genuine, right? In comparison, Cleaver's views on economic systems were revealed in the interview, where he says many feel that they can get these things, materials and freedom, by entering into the mainstream of American society, becoming black capitalists. But to others, including myself, it's clear that in order for black people to have the best that society and technology are capable of providing, we need a new kind of society and a new kind of economic system. So far, he's right. The goal must be to make possible a more equitable distribution of goods and services. In order to achieve that dual goal, we're going to move toward a new form of socialism. So I know this quote, but I never remember he said a new form of socialism. I just remember he said socialism. For you guys listening who are familiar with these economic systems of capitalism and socialism, right, communism, is there, I want to ask a similar question I saw someone ask about religion some months back. Is there a way to improve any of those economic systems for African people? Is there a genuine way to improve those systems, any of those systems, in a genuine way for African people? All right. I want to thank you guys for listening, tuning in tonight. Make sure you guys hit the like button. All right. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed and click the bell to be notified when I'm here. All right. Regarding Black-White Coalition, Cleaver and Malcolm X, who as black Muslims saw whites as devils, made complete turnarounds to include whites in the struggle against oppression based on certain conditions. Malcolm X stated, quote, "My mind is wide open to anybody who will help get the ape off our backs." You know, that sounds a lot like that tweet I talked about earlier this week from the sister, respected sister on Twitter, from what I could tell, who said they don't care about no boogeyman stories. Make the Chinese come and help Haiti now. Right? So if Haiti wants, in her opinion, she would probably say also, her mind is open to anybody who will help get the ape off the backs of Haitians. Right? Malcolm X felt that black unity was a prerequisite to Black-White Coalition, and that in a black-white struggle, black people must lead. Then why have the white folks there? Unless white folks are a shield, why are they there? In comparison, Cleaver stated, certainly we're concerned with building the Black Panther Party, but we also have to build a national coalition between white activists and black activists. Furthermore, he stated, now is the time for whites to help us get the machinery together, to organize themselves and then form coalitions with black groups and Mexican and Puerto Rican groups that also want to bring about social change and then act to do just that. Right? This was an interview in Playboy. problem with all of that is that white folks are fundamentally capitalist and fundamentally self-serving, right? So I have them involved. Upon returning from Africa, Malcolm X strongly advocated unity among Black Americans, calling for a Black United Front among all civil rights organizations. He called for internalizing the Black struggle to include African countries. He also called for the consideration of a Black nationalist party for Black political control of Black communities. Have we had that Black nationalist party really yet? Have we really had that Black nationalist party, a sensible Black nationalist party yet? Malcolm X emphasized that Black people could not think in terms of integration until there was Black unity. Similarly, Cleaver and the Black Panther Party have been working on the grassroots level to unify and educate the Black community. Cleaver noted, no matter where you place Black people under present conditions, they'll still be powerless, still subject to the whims and decisions of the white political and economic apparatus. That's why we've got to get together and stay together. Yeah, but that's also why you wouldn't promote their economic systems, right? Black unity and togetherness imply power, Black power, economic and political Black power, to control Black communities and to determine the destiny of Black people. Politically, Malcolm X philosophized that Black people must control the politics and politicians of their community. Most new Blacks, by the way, would say that will be Dr. Claude Anderson who did that, right? Putting out also politicians who are puppets for outside forces, right? Economically, he asserted, quote, the economic philosophy of Black nationalism means that we should control the economy of our community. Why should white people be running the stores of our community? Similarly, Cleaver emphasized that Blacks should have power to determine the destiny of Black communities. In Cleaver's interview, Playboy 1968, he noted, our basic demand is for proportionate participation in the real power that runs this country. So listen to what he just said. Our basic demand is for proportionate participation. All right, so that's an integrationist mindset. This means that Black people must have part of the decision-making power concerning all legislation, all appropriations of money, foreign policy, every area of life. This brings us to a section called Influences of Malcolm X, Eldridge Cleaver. All right. What I'll do right here is I'll take a quick commercial break, and I'll be back to finish the paper on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out all those shows, including the Revolutionary Matron, KWAZ Radio. Afrojam says BPP, Malcolm X, and MLK became more communist with time. They all became more into oppressed poor people as time went on. I think because communism was viewed as the great opposition at the time, they influenced most of that time. Yeah, they did have that, you know, even Stokely Carmichael and them had that poor people's thing going on. My man from the Black Panther Party with the Rainbow Coalition and all that old shit. Yeah. It's interesting. So this brings us to a section called Influences of Malcolm X on Eldridge Cleaver. Cleaver indicated that admiration for Malcolm X and numerously mentioning him in speeches. writing. Such admiration suggests that Malcolm X did have influence on the actions and ideas of Cleaver. That's a very slick thing this writer just said. Such admiration suggests that Malcolm X did have influence on the actions and ideas of Cleaver. Regarding Malcolm X's assassination, Cleaver wrote, quote, "I still could not believe that Malcolm X was dead. We mingled in prison. The crowd of convicts milling around in the yard, and were immediately surrounded by a group of Muslims, all of whom, like myself, were firm supporters of Malcolm X." In the same document, Cleaver suggested his fellowship of Malcolm X over Muhammad, leader of the Black Muslims. Cleaver often quoted Malcolm X in essays written while he was in prison. He also quoted him on a number of times in his book, Soul on Ice, speeches and in interviews. The interview, for Playboy, Cleaver answered with one of Malcolm X's quotes, quote, "I can only answer with what Malcolm X said. You've had a knife in my back for 400 years. Am I supposed to thank you for pulling it out?" End of quote. Cleaver sought to continue Malcolm X's work after getting out of prison. Shear, in 1969, states, quote, "He, Cleaver, also worked on reviving Malcolm X's Organization of Afro-American Unity, this time to be based in the San Francisco area, but his efforts soon floundered. After joining the Black Panther Party, Cleaver still had a commitment to Malcolm X's organization and its cause. Quote, "When I decided to join the Black Panther Party, the only hang-up I had was with its name. I was so clinging to my conviction that we owed it to Malcolm to pick up where he left off." So this section talks about Malcolm X's influence on Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture. Even with the purpose of this paper, not only to indicate Malcolm X's influence on Cleaver, but to indicate his influence on other Black militants, it might be appropriate here to outline similarities between Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, suggesting Malcolm X's influence on the behavior and ideas of Carmichael. Similar to Malcolm X, Carmichael suggested self-defense, indicating that violence should only be retaliatory. For example, in a speech on the Southern University campus, Carmichael told Black students, quote, "If a white man puts his hand on you, break his arm." In a comparable statement, Malcolm X urged, "If a white man puts his hands on you, send him to the cemetery." Similar to Malcolm X's belief in Black control of Black communities, Stokely Carmichael espoused, "If we are to proceed toward true liberation, we must cut ourselves off from white people. We must form our own institutions, credit unions, co-ops, political parties, write our own histories." In comparison to Malcolm X's belief in certain conditions for Black-white coalition, Carmichael also related a similar condition for a coalition. He said, quote, "Whites should organize among themselves if goals are related to Blacks. You will get no pushback from me on that. You want to help, go over with your people and do the work." Similar to Malcolm X, Carmichael indicated favoritism toward a socialistic society. New York Review of Books in 1966. "The society we seek to build," hold on one second. Sorry about that. The society we seek to build among Black people, then, it's not a capitalistic one. It is a society in which the spirit of community and humanistic love prevail. Wish those guys would talk about what that looks like more. But to continue, Malcolm X's influence on Carmichael was suggested in a number of protest situations where he appeared in a sweatshirt with Malcolm X's picture on it. Moreover, the writer recalls in 1967 on a call-in question and answer radio program from New York, hearing Carmichael replied to a caller who had thanked him for an answer. He replied, "Don't thank me, lady. Thank Brother Malcolm." Brings us to the section on Malcolm X's influence on black student militancy. Let me check in with the chat and see what's going on. So nothing new in the chat. All right, I'll continue with the paper. Turner, 1969, states, quote, Malcolm X is perhaps the single most important influence on black students. Black students at Cornell recently took arms in defending themselves from white students who sought to remove them from a building during a protest. Princeton, black students protested against their university's investments in racist South Africa. At Northwestern University, black students demanded a dormitory where they could live together in unity. At numerous universities, black students are seeking a black education and are becoming involved in the black community. Self-defense at Cornell. Interest in Africa at Princeton. Black unity at Northwestern. And black studies and community involvement, all trends of the black students' concerns, which depict Malcolm X's charges to black youth and suggest his influence on their behavior. Black students are seeking to name buildings and liberation schools and colleges after Malcolm X. They are reading and studying Malcolm X in black studies. Of course, his autobiography, his speeches, his philosophy. Greer and Cobbs in 1968 describes this in Black Rage, saying after his death, he was recognized by black people as the shining prince, and recordings of his speeches became treasured things. His autobiography was studied, his life marveled at. Out of this belated admiration came the philosophical basis for black activism, and indeed the thrust of black power itself, away from integration and civil rights and into the black bag. Black bag. Look what the black bag is today, huh? Betty Shabazz notes the impact of her husband, Malcolm X, on black youth. Quote, today, more than 4 years after his death, I feel gratified about the way Malcolm's ideas have struck a responsive chord among black people in general, particularly black youth. Like Malcolm during his lifetime, they refuse to accept the old expression, quote, you can't fight the system, end of quote. They operate on Malcolm's conviction that if the system wishes to remain, it must voluntarily change or be changed. Anything made can be unmade. Anything made can be unmade. The philosophy of Malcolm X is inherent in black student demands for separate housing in order to be unified in residence. Black studies for the pride and knowledge of their heritage, unity with the black community, black education and black control of the black community, and identification with Africa. The rhetoric of Malcolm X is intrinsic in black students' use of by any means necessary. Punky, suppressors, racism, liberation, black revolution, black nationalism, human rights, the system, Afro-American capitalism, brothers and sisters. Now, a lot of people will criticize this part and say, well, all Malcolm did was talk. But you can't deny inspiration. In 39 years, particularly in 12 years, Malcolm did more than most black folks will do in a lifetime twice as long. So you can't deny his inspiration. You can't say he was a do-nothing, all right? He did a lot. This presentation strongly suggests that Malcolm X had an influence on black militant leaders, black students, and the whole phenomenon of black militancy. This note, it might be appropriate to end this presentation with Lester's statement, which explains the thesis of this paper so well. More than any other person, Malcolm X was responsible for the new militancy entered the movement in 1965. That's the end of the paper. More than any other person, Malcolm X was responsible for the new militancy entered the movement in 1965. Do you guys agree with Malcolm X being the main influencer of new black militancy starting in 1965. Do you guys agree with that or disagree with it? I'll read your comments. Those of you live with me, if you comment. If not, those who are listening to this show in playback, you can post your comments below. By the way, I get a lot of folks who hit me up behind the scenes and tell me they listen to this show sometimes 2-3 times. They listen to different episodes more than once. A lot of folks tell me they can't catch the live, but they do listen to the playback. I appreciate all of that. But I'd like you guys who listen to the playback to post more comments in the comment section. It's the comments that really make this thrive. All right. Revolutionary Matrix says revolutions need language. Right? So you could say Malcolm gave it a certain language. The pro-black perspective says, yeah, Malcolm was a symbol. Yeah, he was a symbol, and you know, we got to give him his props for that. And we got to give props to others who might not get the thrust, 60, 70 years later that Malcolm still gets. MLK still gets. Although MLK wasn't militant at all, right? But, KW Dawn 7 mentioned Robert F. Williams. Like, that's a guy you can put up there as well. I don't think I think he was pushed into some type of leadership. And I think that also is why people don't talk about him that much. But you know what? I'm going to do a show in the future where we talk all about Robert Williams as well. All right? All right. Seems like that's all the comments. I want to thank you guys for being here tonight, joining me for this episode. Saturday, Shoot the Breeze. Be there, 8 p.m. EST. If you have topics, you can bring them that night, post them in the chat. Or you could just join the Discord in the link in the description. Join the Discord, go to the channel that allows you to post topics and Shoot the Breeze. Post them there and I'll discuss them with others like you in the chat on Saturday. In the meantime, check out the Pro-Black Perspective as he continues reading Wretched of the Earth. That's 11 a.m. EST. Live stream here on YouTube. Also check out Revolutionary Matron. I'm not sure of the schedule for the Revolutionary Matron, but if you like and subscribe to her channel, click the bell to be notified. You'll know exactly when she's on. Check her out, and also check out the Harsh Reality Podcast. I'm sure they'll be dropping something new real soon. Till Saturday, Shoot the Breeze. You guys be good. I'll see you then. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.